A very warm welcome to you. Welcome to South Africa. My name is Athi Mtongana, coming to you from the City of Gold in Johannesburg. I'm not alone. I'm joined by the leader of the Economic Freedom Fighters. They call him the Commander-in-Chief, the CIC. Mr. Malema, thank you so much for your time and thank you for joining us on RT. You're quite a busy man to get hold of.
Thank you for having us. Yeah, we've been trying to put this together for quite some time now, but I'm happy we could finally meet.
Where you said, we are Putin and Putin is us. What did you mean about that sentiment?
Well, anyone that is being pursued by the imperialist forces is an alliance of the progressive forces in the whole entire world. What Putin is fighting for really is justifiable. You cannot have America and the European Union wanting to expand its territory to a point where it is allowed to breathe on Putin's neck. And we say in exchange, Putin must give them roses. He's not going to do that. He's going to have to defend his territory. He's going to defend his sovereignty. And we've seen him doing it very well. It's taking long, it's tiring. And we understand that he took a long route with a hope that the international role players will come in and try to diffuse the tension and stop the war. But it seems like they're not interested. Ukraine is such a small country to can even try to put up a fight against Russia, unless it is doing so with the support of some big brothers, including the NATO forces and America. And we know today that that is the case. So that's what we said. You are not going to infringe on other people's territories and threaten their sovereignty and their peace, their economic development, and expect them to keep quiet. We will not do the same.
On that matter, I'm sure you've seen the recent developments where the United States of America has allowed Ukraine to strike deep into Russia's territory by supplying and approving the use of long-range weapons. Now, if you were the president of Russia, Mr. Vladimir Putin, what would you do in this kind of situation?
He has to defend Russia. There is no any other way to do it. And like I said, Ukraine has got no capacity to use the kind of weapons that they are using. They don't have them. Those are American weapons, which means America has declared war against Russia. And what must Russia do? Russia must defend itself by also attending to America. We are very favored perhaps with Trump's election because it doesn't look like even in the previous term, he's got appetite for those things of wars and all of that. And he has already made remarks that, to an extent, that he will want to put Putin and the president of Ukraine under one roof and he can resolve this matter. He didn't say, I'm going to come in and intensify the fight and all of that. So, reactionary and right-wing as he is, but on this matter, he's taking a very good reconciliatory approach which can see the fight between Ukraine and Russia coming to an end. It's not a Ukraine war, it's an American war. It should be called for what it is. It's a European war. And therefore we must not be confused that there is any Ukraine that can actually threaten the stability and peace of Russia without the support of these ones who are fighting a war through Ukraine.
Why do you think the West continuously disregards the red line and disregards some of the warnings that have come from the president of Russia himself in escalating the tension?
Well, they've always behaved like a big brother. Everybody must hear through them, and anything else that is not in the interest of what they stand for should go to a highway. So, and Putin is not the kind that is going to be pushed all over by Americans. America has got no respect for international law. America has got no respect for international bodies that are meant to safeguard the world and ensure that conflicts are resolved through peaceful means. They only do so if it favors them. If it doesn't favor them, they don't care. I mean, look at the American position in relation to the Middle East. They condemn the ICC's warrant of arrest against Netanyahu and then promote a warrant of arrest, international warrant of arrest against Putin. That is inconsistent. Putin hasn't committed serious crimes compared to what Netanyahu has done, where he bombed schools, crèches, hospitals, killed children and pregnant women and innocent people. And the evidence is there to prove that someone is engaged in a genocide. And therefore, the ICC has got a duty to ensure that there is compliance with the international law. So America, again, showing its ugly head where it says, no, we had no duty to issue a warrant of arrest against Netanyahu. We want, actually, Netanyahu to be arrested. If he comes to South Africa, they must arrest him. I've already written a written question to President in Parliament to ask him if Netanyahu comes to South Africa, will he arrest him? Because he said they were going to arrest Putin. And they've got a similar problem now. Putin is going to have to come here for G20 in November next year. And we think that they must stop being cowards and allow him to come because Russia is our friend and Russia committed no crimes against us or against other human beings without being justified as to the actions they have taken. So we think Putin must be welcomed here in South Africa and Netanyahu must be arrested if he set his foot here.
Do you think it's realistic to arrest the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, and the former Defense Minister, Yoav Gallant?
It is possible. You just need countries to be compliant with the international law. There is a warrant of arrest being issued, and everybody else, especially those who are signatories, they've got a duty to make sure that he is arrested.
How would you combat sanctions that would come as a result of your aligning yourself with Russia? The US would come in, the EU would come in with sanctions. How would you combat? How would you deal with that? Well,
there are alternative markets now. The Russians were able to combat those sanctions that were imposed on them. The Russian economy grew under the sanctions. So we are happy that the world is becoming a multipolar type of world where if this markets close, other markets will open alternative. I mean, China is there. We are in the BRICS community. If Europe close, if America close, we can look at in the BRICS communities as to which ones can they take our products. We can produce for ourselves, feed ourselves, and produce for the continent as well. Because it's not necessarily entirely correct that its influence will be to an extent that even our neighboring countries will be unable to trade with us. We cannot allow America to continue to violate all of us on the basis that they've got the power to impose sanctions on us. That is political dictatorship. That if you don't agree with me, I'm going to use a big brother stick to silence you.
What would you say to the economic dependence of South Africa on Western states today?
No, its dependence on those other Western states, it is a current affairs matter now. They are working those relations now. When they are threatened, you shift those interests into alternative interests because whatever we are exchanging with the West doesn't mean we can't exchange it with other countries. There are many other countries. And as you are about to engage in a support of Russia, you should also know that there will be consequences. And how do you combat those? You start preparing alternative markets and even improving your trading relations with Russia itself.
Do you think countries within Africa have enough strength and resources to be able to free themselves from Western neo-colonialism?
Actually, African countries are what is holding this world together. Without the African resources, these people will not be what they are. I mean, there will not be a country called France if there was no Africa. France, it is what it is because of the exploitation of the mineral resources of Africa. And therefore, imagine if our minerals can do for other people's countries, how much those minerals can do for us. So we must make sure that we nationalize our land. It's owned by African states. We nationalize our resources, and we use those resources, natural and mineral resources, to exchange amongst ourselves and trade freely to grow the African economy. It is not, of course, we are now in the globalized world where we need each other, but it doesn't mean Africa without these people will die. Africa existed without them.
You've spoken about Cuba and Russia and some of the missiles that have been provided by Russia in Cuba. I want to know from you, because the last time this happened, it led to a very near nuclear war. Now, if Russia were to repeat that, what do you think would happen today?
That's what America should be thinking about, because Russia can repeat it. And the Cubans will allow them, because the Cubans are in a strategic relationship with Russia, and they've received a lot of support from Russians after America imposed an embargo on them. So the whole thing is about this nuclear war, so much that every move has to be properly calculated, because you can trigger a nuclear war, and no one wants to engage in that kind of war. But the way America is dealing with Russia is dealing with it in a very reckless manner, and it doesn't take into account the possibility of engaging in a nuclear war.
There have been reports that the US has ballistic missiles in Poland. Why do you think this has not brought the world to the brink of a collapse, considering the statement that I made earlier on that if Russia were again to supply missiles in Cuba, the last time that happened, it led to the near nuclear war? But considering the fact that the US is making inroads and building these bases, particularly this one in Poland, why do you think that hasn't come to a point where we are reaching a stage of a nuclear war?
It is all pointing in that direction, unless something gets to be done. And then, like I said earlier, the elections in America have suggested that in relation to Russia-American relations, there could be a possible improvement of relations which can possibly avoid this nuclear war. It is not in the best interest of anyone. But Russians are not going to fold their arms when they are being threatened. They too are going to start preparing in that direction, and it will not be good for international stability and international peace. Every matter ought to be resolved peacefully through bodies such as UN that America must respect, must not use its veto powers every time they are not happy with a decision of the majority which seeks to bring about the world peace and stability.
South Africa and Russia are one of the countries that are advocating for a multipolar world. You pointed to this earlier on. And given the fact that the West wants to maintain its hegemony, what kind of ideas would you put forward to prevent Western conflicts that are taking place around the world?
No, the multipolar way is the way out of this, where there is no big brother that wants to impose his or her views on the people of the world. And at the center of that will be to, engage in structural changes in the UN, especially the UN Security Cluster, and do away with that veto power. We shouldn't have one country that has got capacity to just, undermine the majority. Even if you vote all of you as one against that country, just use its veto, and that veto threatens international stability. So we need to change the structure of the UN, and the simple democracy that they told us suggests that simple majority must rule. In the case of the UN, you can even say 2/3, if you so want, but let the will of the majority be respected. Because now everything else that is being done there, it's a waste of time. As long as this or that country which has got a veto power doesn't agree, it will veto a very progressive, good decision. If the UN decisions were binding, we wouldn't have that war we're having in the Middle East. There are many progressive resolutions that were vetoed. Even Russia, we could have taken a peaceful route that said, let's not expand the NATO territories to a point where we threaten Russian stability and security and its sovereignty, because it will be forced to defend itself.
I often hear a lot of people advocating for Africa to have a permanent voice within the UN Security Council. You mentioned it just now, but I would like to know from you what exactly needs to be done for Africa to be recognized in that fashion, for it to be a permanent voice there within the UN Security Council.
No, South Africa and the whole of African continent must stop electing puppets. They need to elect people who are going to challenge the status quo, and not from a lip service. They must be able to put up a case in such a way that their voice is being heard. So we have a lot of clowns that get elected here in the continent. They go there and then they go shopping instead of going to fight for the recognition of the African continent. So we still have got a long way to go. We still have some of the countries in Africa that are still paying colonial taxes to France and things like that. And we expect such people to go to the UN Security Council and agree that Africa must be represented. So we need to politically conscientize and take over the African continent and position Africa in the UN Security Council at the same level as India, China, Russia, America, and all of that. Because the reality is that we are equal. And actually we have got more resources than them, but we are treated like we are the stepchildren of the world. Because our leadership hasn't demonstrated that power to force the Security Council and the UN to agree that Africa should be a permanent member of the Security Council. The Security Council has become one of the strategic organs of the UN, and it's important that we have a voice, and that voice ought to be permanent, and it must exercise the same powers that the rest of permanent members are exercising.
Well, some African leaders have accused the West of influencing outcomes of elections, or they've even accused the West of coming into Africa in the guise of combating terrorism. What would you say to such allegations?
It's true. They've always manipulated elections, especially in the countries where the institutions are not that in order. In the rural Zimbabwe, where in the rural areas, there are no observers. And if you try to be an observer of a different political party, the army points a finger at you, that if you still want to stay here, this kind of things is not going to be tolerated here. We are a democracy that is maturing. Our people are becoming more clever and clever. And not after a very long time will we realize true freedom even outside the Western influence. The Western influence is through culture, is through media. Now there is alternative platforms to counter that narrative. That's why even when the mainstream media wants to say whatever it wants to say, the alternative media gives us the correct information that we can critique, analyze, and accept which one becomes a better version. Look at RT today. They banned it in South Africa. But nothing has stopped us from accessing the Russian news. They thought we were relying on them alone. And that's how they wanted to influence us, the West, so that they only feed us through their mainstream newspapers what is actually happening between Russia and Ukraine. The alternative media has given us the realities of what's transpiring in those countries. And South Africa is in a much, much more better position now to say we're with Russia, we're with Palestine, we're with Cuba, and things like that. Yeah.
The Sahel region is currently investigating Ukraine with regards to it coming into the Sahel regions, particularly in Sudan and Somalia, with its weapons. They have a brewing and ongoing conflict on their doorstep. Why do you think they are diverting their resources in places like Sudan?
Well, like I said to you, they don't have any muscle power to can even extend themselves to any other country. They are always used as a front. You should know wherever you find Ukraine, the Western forces are interested wherever it is. So it can be that confronted with Russia, you can still open another front when you know you are militarily challenged. So it's not their own battles. The instability there, it benefits the West. And that's why they are now sending their people to want to continue more confusion, as it were, in that part of our continent, so that there's no stability and they continue to benefit from that instability.
It would be remiss of me not to ask you, since the Sahel region is investigating Ukraine for allegedly being in some of these regions in Africa with weapons, it would be remiss of me to ask you that what do you think the African Union then would say about these actions by Kiev?
That's what they should have. The African Union should pronounce itself, as it were, that it's not going to allow that kind of conduct in the continent coming from Ukraine, and not leave it there. They must take it to the UN and to call for the condemning of the acts of Ukraine, because they are unacceptable. But they won't do it because they're in the pockets of these people.
So what would you say needs to reform in international institutions to literally be able to hold powerful figures to account, even given the fact that those instances, for example, where Barack Obama, you've accused him of allowing NATO in the instance of Libya. Yeah. Do you think that coming up with ways to reform these international institutions would still go back and be able to trace these figures in their involvement in these issues around the world? Do you think that it is possible?
It is possible. That's why we're calling for the transformation of the Security Council, so that it can bite. It can be that people who have committed such serious crimes, it doesn't matter when, they are left untouched. I mean, the people who killed the Jews are still being arrested till today. Do you find a man who can walk in a wheelchair being tried because he was part of the Hitler's military council that killed Jewish people? So if we can still do it with the Jewish people, we must be able to do it with everyone, where people were killed in an unjustifiable manner, and Obama was responsible, Bush was responsible, and Tony Blair. We have a duty to follow them up for as long as they are still alive.
You have alluded to Mr. Vladimir Putin being in defense mode insofar as the developments there between it and Ukraine, that is Russia. Where do you think the line is of a state defending its national security and escalations of tension?
No, when you defend your territory, Putin has made it very clear. He said to the president of Ukraine, just make a simple pronouncement that you are not joining NATO. It's as simple as that. And the guy is not committing to that because, he's a comedian, he's a joke himself who was put there so that this agenda can be pursued. And when Russia says, okay, if you continue with this, we'll act in self-defense, as a way of pushback. And then Ukraine insist and even escalate. There's no way Russia is not going to escalate. If Ukraine escalates, especially with the kind of sophisticated weapons that they do not have, Russia is going to have to use its own sophisticated weapons to defend itself. And America is to be blamed because America is the one that is supplying Ukraine.
Talking about America, I want to go back to Donald Trump. You did speak about him earlier on. I want to ask you, what do you make of his impending second term in the White House, given his stance and the statements that he's made about Africa? Do you foresee any changes or weakening or strengthening of U.S. relations and Africa?
No, I expect continuation of the same U.S. attitude towards the world. The Republicans and the Democrats are the same. It's like saying to me, and Fidel Castro makes that point very clear, it's like saying to me, I must differentiate between the two shoes, one shoe of the same pair of shoes and say, this one is better than the other one, but it's the same pair of shoe, but with two different shoes. So America, whether Republicans or Democrats, the American interest supersede any other interest. The difference is in the approach. Like I said to you, Trump is not a fanatic of war. He's a man who believes that we can still achieve what we want to achieve through other means. And we're likely to see some form of a resolution in Ukraine and Russia because he's got some respect, in fact, for Putin. We will see what's going to happen in the Middle East because he has eaten a lot of Jewish money, so he may have a difficulty in taking a very clear stance when it comes to the support of Israel and all of that. But the only slightest, smallest thing is that the guy is not a fanatic of war. And that helps us because that's what we want. We want a peaceful resolution. But America, even when it intervenes, it will not intervene in the best interest of anyone. It will find other methods and mechanisms to continue American agenda, even if it's not through war.
Let me move to the IMF and the World Bank and their influence within the economy of Africa. Do you think there are alternative financial institutions that can certainly help alleviate the economic dire condition of African states?
BRICS Bank must be strengthened. There must be more investment in the BRICS Bank. There must be more investment in alternative banks because the IMF and the World Bank are not interested in building Africa. Their assistance to the African countries is to cripple them and say to them, you can't perform certain duties, you can't put money in this and that. And when you look at that, it is actually the things that you can't put money in, austerity measures, are things that are the primary responsibility of a state. And when they say you can't put money in these things and impose austerity measures, they are actually collapsing that state. They are not helping Africa at all. So I think that the more emphasis has to be made that banks such as BRICS Bank should be strengthened so that they can be able to help African countries and the countries all over the world that need our support. I mean, Cuba has got so much potential. It's under American embargo. And with a BRICS Bank, whether Cuba is a member or not, but with its progressive agenda, there should be a deliberate, agenda and intention to help Cuba to stand on its own against American embargo and still be able to survive. Talking
about BRICS, I want to leave that as a parting shot and ask you, where do you see BRICS in the next 10 years and what kind of ideas would you say BRICS needs to continue unifying and becoming this global South power?
BRICS is an exciting alternative platform which is going to grow. In the last BRICS summit in Russia, more members have joined. We expect that there will be more others because everybody embraces a platform where they can express themselves, where they will feel accommodated and welcomed. And that's where BRICS is. We have a situation where our people are able to exchange ideas and trade together. And there's even talks about coming with an alternative currency against the dollar and all of that. So it's an exciting development, which we fully support. And we hope that we can have majority of the world being part of BRICS, and BRICS having learned from these other multinational bodies. What are their weaknesses? They don't repeat a similar mistake. They actually provide practical, working alternative program. Yeah.
Mr. Malema, as I said before, you are a busy man, and we do appreciate you taking the time to talk to us on RT. Thank you so much for being here.